Good evening, all. Tonight's shiur, as always, Li'ili Nishmat Avimori Rado Ber Meir Ben Reuven Alevi Imi Marati Rachel Bat Harav Michael. Actually, my mother's yard set happens to be this week, so I guess I should be double Li'ili Nishmat my mother and on her with our upcoming yard site. This week we read parshat Nitzavim. Parshat Nitzavim is always read on the Shabbat prior to Rosh Hashana. And very simply, I know everybody always wonders, well, how do we figure out which parshat, when parashot are split and when they're joined? Parshat Nitzavim Vayelech is relatively easy to figure out. When Rosh Hashanah is Thursday or Shabbat, the two parashot are read together on the Shabbos prior to Rosh Hashanah. And when Rosh Hashanah is either Monday or Tuesday, they are read separately, with Nitzavim being before Rosh Hashanah and Vayelach being following Rosh Hashanah. But anyway, this year, with Rosh Hashanah being on a Monday, Nitzavim is read separately, and Vayelach will be read the following next Shabbat. And Parshat Nitzavim contains within it a parsha that is known in the Talmudic and rabbinic literature as Parshat HaTeshuva. Very appropriate, I guess, for this time of year when we are embarking on Rosh Hashanah, the Yamim Noraim, the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which we refer to as Aseret Yimei Teshuva, the 10 days of return, specifically geared toward, I always call it, our annual spiritual accounting. We always do financial accounting. We do all sorts of other annual calendars. There are numerous different calendars that we as human beings go through. One might be the secular solar calendar, which begins in January and ends in December. One, of course, the Hebrew calendar, which begins in Tishrei and ends in Elul, which is very strange given that Tishrei in the Torah is the 7th month. We would say, wait a minute, the beginning of the year is really Nisan, which is the first month from the Torah's perspective. And yet we refer to the first day of Tishrei as Rosh Hashanah. By the way, the Torah never refers to it as Rosh Hashanah. It's always referred to as Yom Truah or as Yom HaZikaron, but not as Rosh Hashanah. That's based on a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, the first Mishnah, which tells us that Rosh Hashanah, the first of Tishrei, is the Rosh Hashanah, or is the day that all mankind passes before God in judgment. So it's very appropriate that we read Nitzavim right before it, because as I said, Nitzavim talks about the concept of choices, free will, and tshuva. Now it's interesting because in the Torah, we have a chapter which I've highlighted here on the screen, Parshat Nitzavim. This is, as I said, called Parshat HaTeshuva. It's 10 short psukim, and interestingly enough, Hashem is referred to as Hashem Elokecha a dozen times within the space of 10 psukim. So it's first, the fact that it's 10 psukim, I think, is not necessarily coincidental that we talk about the 10 days, the Aseret Yimei Teshuva. And also we have, again, the word lashuv, shin bet, vashevota, vishavta, vishav, notice highlighted in yellow, also is a theme word in this passage, hence the name Parshat HaTeshuva. But the Parshat Teshuva is a very interesting parsha in the way it designs, or the way it describes events that are going to happen from Moshe's perspective in the future. So this is Moshe's this is really the end. We're getting to the end of Moshe's farewell address. The Parshat Nitzavim begins with Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem, and the Midrash tells us that this is the day that Moshe is to die. It's Moshe's 120th birthday, and he knows he's going to die on this day, and he gathers all of Bnei Yisrael together for one last final pep talk. And this Parshat Teshuva really forms the basis of this final Musar Shmuz of Moshe Rabbeinu. Again, as I said, very, very clearly wants us to remember our relationship with Hashem is Elokecha. As I said, 12, I think it's 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 times in the space of 10 psukim. Moshe refers to Hashem as Hashem Elokecha, even though many of these Hashem Elokechas we could have used a pronoun instead of the proper name of Hashem, and the Torah and the pasuk would have flowed just as smoothly. But Moshe wants to emphasize our individual relationship with Hashem after the beginning of the parsha focuses on our collective relationship, A, to each other, and B, to Hashem as a nation. The whole concept of arevut, of Kol Yisrael arevim zeh bazeh, that we are all responsible for each other to strengthen each other, at least in those things that we are aware of from an outside, from a visible perspective. We have a mission as the Jewish people to be united in seeking Hashem and in seeking to fulfill the mitzvot of the Torah and to come closer to Hashem, but also in strengthening each other in our observance and giving productive feedback, to constructive feedback, I think is the word we use today, to those who need chizuk, by coaching others, by being a role model for others, by helping others, by properly telling people that they're doing things that are incorrect in a way that is non-threatening, in a way that is promoting their growth rather than tearing them down and attacking them and criticizing them. I'm not saying that that's easy to do. It is probably the most challenging thing that a human being has to do, or has to do, is to be able to appropriately give constructive feedback. That is one of the most challenging things in human society, whether we look at the Torah society, whether we look at the secular society, whether we look at the job and you're somebody's boss or coach or mentor, trying to get them to excel within themselves by pointing out those areas where they can improve. But again, if you can improve, it means you're not perfect. So it is always telling somebody, hey, here's something you did that could be better. It's a very challenging thing to do. But it's the cornerstone of Teshuva, is we have to look ourselves in the mirror and say, I could do better. Which means I have to admit that I'm not perfect. Some people have a problem with that I made a mistake. How could that possibly be? So that is one of the greatest challenges of this time of year, of the Teshuva process. But I think really in parshat Nitzavim, in addition to looking at the individual Teshuva, the parsha is really focusing us on the national Teshuva, the Teshuva at a national level, not just Teshuva of returning to Hashem, returning to the Torah and mitzvot, but returning to our commitment to Eretz Yisrael. Because if we look at this parsha, it's a very, very interesting parsha, and so I wanted to go through it, because I think it's worthwhile. First, it begins with interesting. It starts with, this is going to happen. Moshe is telling us a prophecy about something that's going to happen in the future. In the future, all of these things that we've talked about in the past, in the previous parsha, the parsha of Kitavo that we talked about last week, the Tochacha, all of the calamities that are going to fall before Bnei Yisrael when they fail to listen to the Torah, and all of the blessings that Hashem is going to send their way when they observe and commit to living a Torah life. So after all of these things have happened, we've seen the blessings, we've seen the curses, we've seen that Moshe's words from Hashem, or Hashem's words through Moshe, are not to be taken lightly. They're very clear. It's clear that when we collectively as a community are striving to better ourselves as individuals and better ourselves collectively, that Hashem sends us the tools to do it. Prosperity, peace, good health. All of those are gifts from Hashem to help us achieve our mission. When we turn our backs on Hashem and forget our mission, Hashem removes them and sends all sorts of calamities our way, which were all described in last week's parsha. But Moshe tells us there will come a time when you've been through all of those calamities and again, you will realize that these are calamities that Hashem has put before you. Now again, the root here is hashevota. Means you will return to your heart. Now, what does it mean to return to your heart? It means you will reflect on what has happened to you. All that we as individuals and we collectively as the Jewish people have been through throughout history. Even though we're still living among the nations, where Hashem has scattered us, has let us become lost. So one of the things that Hashem realizes, this is that we have to realize, when we find ourselves outside of Eretz Yisrael, it's not the misfortunes of history. It is Hashem, and Moshe emphasized it. Hashem elokecha shama. Why did you end up in all of those other countries outside of Eretz Yisrael? Because Hashem is the one who caused you to be lost there. But when we return to Hashem, and we hearken to His voice, according to all that you've been commanded. Now again, we're going to have another phrase that's going to appear repeatedly in this passage. It's not just perfunctory going through the motions. It's earnestly, with all of your heart, with all of your soul. In other words, if you want Hashem to send all of these wonderful things our way as individuals and collectively, we've got to feel it. We've got to be emotionally attached to the Torah to the extent that it becomes part and parcel of who we are. It permeates our very fibers, our very being. We should recognize those words very clearly from the Kriyat Shema, from our daily statement of faith. We have to do it not just because it's the Jewish thing to do, our parents did it. We have to do it because we feel a connection to Hashem. And if we do it earnestly and feel connection, the people around us will see that, will feel it, will want to be part of that. That's part of that, as I said, we see in the Kriyat Shema every day. We see it here. We're going to see it again a number of times in this short parsha. Now, Hashem will return, just like we talked about. When we turn our back on Hashem, Hashem turns our back on us. So when we turn back to facing Hashem, Hashem says, He will return and richamecha, He will have mercy on us. V'shav, and He will return, v'kibetzcha mikol ha'amim. He will gather you from all of those nations. Asher hafitzcha Hashem elokecha shama. Again, Moshe reminding us that same word, hafitzcha Hashem elokecha shama, where Hashem has scattered you. We didn't just get scattered by the winds of time and the winds of history. It was Hashem's doing to scatter us. One Medrash says Hashem had to scatter us to save us, because had we all been in one place, it would have been a lot easier for our enemies to destroy us. The fact that we were scattered throughout the world in different locations upon the globe meant that Jews as a nation survived the last 2 millennia, because when they were killing Jews in one place, they were harboring Jews in another place. And if you go through Jewish history, you will see that when Jews are thrown out of one country, there is always another country that is waiting and ready to accept them. That's been the history of the diaspora over the past 2,000 years. Perhaps it's changed now because we have Eretz Yisrael back under Jewish control. And that's what Moshe is telling us is going to happen. V'shav Hashem elokecha shvutcha v'richamecha v'shav v'kibetzcha mikol ha'amim asher hafitzcha Hashem elokecha shama. Again, Hashem is going to return, and gather you from all of those places you've been scattered to. Anybody who walks the streets in Eretz Yisrael knows that this is happening, because you can hear people speaking over 100 different languages in this country as their native tongue, because they weren't born in Eretz Yisrael. So there are people like us whose native tongue is English because we were born in an English-speaking country. There are people whose native tongue is French because they were born in a French-speaking country. They've all come back to live, not just because they decided. This is all part of Hashem bringing us back to Eretz Yisrael because time has come. And Pasuk Dalet says, no matter how far you can be at the edge of the planet, doesn't matter how far you've gotten from Eretz Yisrael, when the time comes, again, we think, look what we've done. We've come to Eretz Yisrael, we've made Aliyah. We are part of Hashem returning his people to Eretz Yisrael. Moshe emphasizes this over and over again. I've highlighted in the blue. Every highlighted blue means Hashem is doing something. Notice Hashem is prominently appears throughout this passage. Hashem Elokecha, over and over again. Moshe is emphasizing us. Don't think this is just a historical phenomenon. This is Hashem sending us a very loud and clear wake-up call. It's time to come back home. When we are in control of Eretz Yisrael, it's time for Jews to be coming home, no matter where we are scattered from. Now, there are some people who believe that, well, Hashem said he'll do it, so we have to wait for Hashem. That's not the way Hashem generally works. We know that when the Gemara has a phrase, Habal Taher Misayin Oto, that when one begins the process of purification, Hashem helps him. But it's rare that Hashem will take the first step. Hashem may give you lots of signals that it's time for you to take the first step, lots of wake-up calls, but Hashem generally does not take the first step. You have to take the first step. We, the Jewish people, have to take the first step. And I think if we look at the history of the past 75 years, we see that the Jewish people have indeed begun to take those steps, to begin to return to Eretz Yisrael, to begin to rebuild Eretz Yisrael. All of this is really what the parsha of Teshuva is focusing us on. Okay? As we've been where's Hashem going to bring us to? Finally, after we've been through all of the exiles throughout the planet, to the land that your ancestors inherited, and you will once again inherit it. And Hashem will make things good for you. You will be better for you than your ancestors when they lived here. And you will be more numerous. So there are all of these blessings inherent in this return process. The process begins at the beginning. We go back to verse 1. When we begin to start thinking about returning to Hashem, we've turned our backs on Hashem. Hashem has scattered us throughout the world. Now we're trying to come back to Hashem. And Hashem says, okay, I will hear you. I will accept that. I will allow you to return, and I will return you to Eretz Yisrael. Not only will I return you to Eretz Yisrael, I will make things better than they ever were in Eretz Yisrael. But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. Even though Moshe has this all happening in 10 short psukim, this is a process. It takes time. It's, as we say, if we think back to the original first Aliyah, of the 19th century, the whole 20th century, it didn't come easy. This has not been a slam dunk for Am Yisrael that we just walked in and suddenly, boom, the land blossomed. It's been a lot of hard work on our behalf, but we only were able to be successful because Hashem succeeded, because we're not the first people to try to build homes in Eretz Yisrael over the period of diaspora. Many nations passed through here, conquered it, tried to settle it, and Hashem said, no, you're not the Jewish people. You don't have title to this land. Only when the Jewish people come back will the land begin to blossom. And that's really inherent in this pasuk of Eitivcha v'hirbecha me'avotecha, that Hashem says, when you come back, then the land will be better than it was in the time of your ancestors. But until that time, it's not going to work. But once we get back, it's very interesting. When we look at this, there's a process unfolding. And every time we have a shav, there's another step in the process. So the first step of the process is we think about doing tshuva, think about returning to Hashem. Hashem says, okay, I'll start the process. You started the process, I'll start meeting you. Okay, we continue that process. Hashem gathers us in. But finally, it can't continue if we forget one thing. We may have a relationship with Hashem. We may feel, oh, we're back in Eretz Yisrael, but we cannot forget the Torah and the mitzvot either. Hashem will literally circumcise your heart, which again seems very strange. It means that Hashem will remove those things in our psyche that keep us, that cause us to want to leave Hashem, that cause us to want to stray. That what is the result of very, very similar to the phraseology of, again, when Hashem opens our eyes and opens our hearts after we've begun the process, Hashem now helps us complete the process by returning to Hashem, L'man chayecha, in order that you will be able to live. Now, again, we have to remember that chayecha here, while we often think of chayim in the concept of physical life, it's also intended to be meaningful life, a spiritual life, a life where we're not just existing, but a life where we're living it to the fullest. We're enjoying the gifts that Hashem has given us. We're enjoying the health, the prosperity, the gifts of Eretz Yisrael, and we're doing it in the context of living a Torah life. So that means we're helping those who need help. We're reaching out to others who haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to the Torah that we've been exposed to. All of these things are part and parcel of this whole covenant that Hashem is creating with Am Yisrael, that Moshe is reminding us. It may take time. Remember, it's not going to happen until Yavo Alecha Kol Advarim Ha'ela. All of these things have happened. You've been through all of this history of exile, all of the pogroms, all of the inquisitions, all of the Holocaust. You've been through all of these things where people have just tried to destroy the Jewish people. Why? Because we turned our back on Hashem. And once we come back to Hashem, Hashem says, okay, now you will again flourish. You will again be prosperous. You will return to Eretz Yisrael, which is the only place on earth where the Jews can build a nation, where the Jews can build a home that is more than temporary. No matter where else we are on the globe, we're there temporarily. Yes, Yirmiyahu tells us in the Navi, as the Jews are being exiled, you have to go build homes there. You have to live there. But it's always with an eye on the fact that this is a temporary home. We're only here by the grace of the ruler, and they can throw us out on a whim anytime they choose. We're never really home until we get to Eretz Yisrael, until we get back to Eretz Yisrael. And that's really what this parsha is all about. And Hashem and Moshe continues with V'ata tashuv v'shamata b'kol Hashem. The ultimate final step of this is that not only do we return physically to Eretz Yisrael, not only are we able to build a land and build a physical livelihood, a physical flourishing state, but v'shamata b'kol Hashem, we're going to ultimately be able to build a society based on the values of the Torah. That together, collectively, the Am Yisrael will be performing all of the mitzvot that Moshe has commanded, Hashem has commanded us as Hashem's messenger. And what will happen is Hashem will then make things so that you have an abundance. In all of the things that you do, be free vitnecha, your families, be free v'emtecha, your flocks, free admotcha, your crops, litova. Here's the key word. Hashem wants to give us a life that is tov. If we go back to creation, the phrase that symbolizes creation, Vayar Elokim ki tov. Hashem saw everything in creation as being good. When we follow the Torah and the mitzvot, Hashem wants to give us all of these blessings of Tov. They're for our good. Hashem wants it to be for good. We should never view observance of mitzvot as a burden. They should always be something that Hashem has given us for our benefit. That is another key phrase here. Only appears once, this word latova, but it's an important aspect that when Hashem sends us blessings, it's for our good. We have to realize it. We have to realize that it's Hashem sending us the blessing. We have to realize that, yes, we've put in our efforts, but it's only through the grace of Hashem that we are able to be blessed. Hashem lasus alecha letov. Now Hashem will rejoice over you, over your goodness. Just like he rejoiced at the blessings that he was able to bestow. Hashem created mankind for the purpose of bestowing the blessings of this world. It's a beautiful world. There are abundant blessings here if we use them properly and we remember the grantor, that Hashem is the one who has granted us all of this prosperity, all of our health, all of our resources, and all of our abilities are all gifts from Hashem that he wants us to have. He wants us to use in the service of Hashem. Ki tishma b'kol Hashem Elokecha, when we hearken to the voice of Hashem, lishmor mitzotav v'chukotav, to observe his mitzvot and his chukim ha'ktuba b'sefer Torah as they are written in this Torah. Ki tashuva el Hashem Elokecha, and again the phrase again, el Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. So this short passage of 10 psukim, again, notice has this concept of returning to Hashem with a full heart, full soul. Hashem blesses us with his. We return, we listen to Hashem. Lots of different themes, as I said, that appear very, very repetitively in this very short passage, all around the concept of living our lives around the values of the Torah. So if we go back now and we look at the concept of Teshuva in the perspective of Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, Aseret Yimei Teshuva, and how it relates to this, it really doesn't. Yes, it's the same source, it's the same root, and yes, collectively it does. But when we think about Aseret Yimei Teshuva, we're thinking about two different things. One is our individual teshuva, and two is our participation in the community, as a part of a community that is reaching out to Hashem. One of the things we know, one of the highlights of the Rosh Hashana, or not so much Rosh Hashana, but Yom Kippur and this Aseret Yimei Teshuva davening, is the recitation of the Shlosh Esrei Midot. Hashem kel rachum l'chanu nerach hapayim rav chesed v'emet. How many times during the course of Slichot do we repeat that phrase? How many times on Yom Kippur during the davening do we repeat that recitation? And it can only be recited primarily in a tzibur, in a congregation. So while this parsha, as I said, talks about the communal return, the Shlosh Esrei Midot are really what tie us together as a people when we come to daven before Hashem to accept our tshuva. The value and purpose of the Shlosh Esrei Midot is that we are supposed to be using those Shlosh Esrei Midot as a guide for how we live our lives. Just like we use the Torah as a guide to live our lives, Shlosh Esrei Midot are representative of that. So we are supposed to be emulating Hashem in how we live our lives. Just like Hashem is merciful, we are supposed to be merciful. Just like Hashem is gracious to others, we are supposed to be gracious. The Midrash tells us that if we look at the Torah and we focus on the beginning of the Torah and the end of the Torah, we find that the Torah begins with a kindness, with what we call in Hebrew, gemilut chasadim, doing something for somebody else. What is the first thing Hashem, that the Torah wants to tell us about gemilut chasadim? That when Hashem finds out that Adam and Chava don't have clothing, Hashem makes them the first set of clothing. Vayaz Hashem Elokim le'adam u'lishto katnot or vayal b'shem, we're told in Rosh. So the Torah begins with Hashem, firstly, forgiving Adam for not listening to him, to the extent that he doesn't immediately punish him. And secondly, providing now for this new need that Adam has created for himself through the sin, because before the sin, he obviously was just as without clothes, but he didn't realize that there was anything wrong with that. Now, after the sin, Adam has realized that. So Hashem's first post-sin interaction with Adam is Gmilut Chasadim, doing kindness. So we are supposed to learn from that, and we are also supposed to provide for those who don't have, whether it's clothing, whether it's food, whether it's shelter. We are supposed to provide for that. The last thing we read about in the Torah at the end of parshat Zot HaBracha is how Hashem himself, Kiviyachol, I don't know how we do this, but Hashem himself buries Moshe Rabbeinu. Hashem provides for the burial of Moshe. The last thing we do for a human being is we give kavod, we give honor to the body that housed the neshama. Even though we know that the neshama continues to live in a different plane of existence following the end of our physical lives, we give respect to the dead, to the body that housed that neshama, by giving it proper burial. Hashem is the one who teaches us that. Of course, we also saw that in Avram Avinu and in the purchase of Machpelah and all of the stories about the Avot and the burials thereof in Marat HaMachpelah. But Moshe Rabbeinu is buried by Hashem to teach us again this very important lesson of Gemilut Chasadim, that we are to emulate Hashem in our treatment of others. And then that's why it's interesting, because unfortunately there are many people who believe that all you have to do is come to shul, say the Shloshim Midos, and Hashem automatically forgives you. That's not what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that the Shloshim Midos are effective when the tzibur, it says Yasu Shloshim Midot. When we live our lives in accordance with Shloshim Midot, then Hashem listens to our tefillot when we recite the Shloshim Midot. If we don't, if we live our lives in a completely different fashion, then Hashem does not necessarily listen to our tefillot to the same extent he does when we do. So that's really what Aseret Yemei Teshuva are about. It's about reminding ourselves that we still have others that we have to worry, be concerned with, that we areas, no matter what we've accomplished during the previous year, there's always, if we're still alive, there's always room for improvement and growth, and that we should be undertaking, just like we do Kiviyachol Lahavdil on January 1st, we make resolutions of how all the things we're going to do better. So too on Rosh Hashana, when we go through our davening in Rosh Hashana, we should be thinking of things that we can do to improve ourselves in our relationship with others, in our relationship with ourselves, and in our relationship with Hashem. And the best way we do this is not by trying to solve world hunger one shot, taking little steps. Try to find something small that you can do and try doing it for a week, a month, and seeing if that's something you can build on. Because all too often, when we try to solve a major project without cutting it into small steps, we ultimately lose hope and we lose faith, which is why if you read anything in the secular or psychological journals, you'll find that 99.99% of all New Year's resolutions last about 24 hours, if that long. And if we are sincere with ourselves and we really feel that we can make a difference in how we live our lives, we have to do it a small step at a time. I think that's one of the things that we need to be aware of in Rosh Hashanah. Another aspect of Rosh Hashanah, of course, is the blowing of the shofar, which has a dual aspect. Just briefly, one of the aspects of the blowing of the shofar is, again, to wake us up, to remind us that this day has a meaning. It's not just this day. It's something that we have to take with us. Just like every Shabbos, we're supposed to take the spirit of Shabbos with us into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. To live, to have that a spiritual connection to our work week, so too Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Aseret Yemei Teshuva is supposed to give us a recharging that will take us through the next year. Shofar is a part of that. It's the wake-up call that reminds us that we have work to do. Hashem has given us another year of life. Every one of those days is precious. There's something we can accomplish on every one of them, and we need to strive to find something productive to do on every one of those days. Even if it's something as simple as reaching out to someone else, whether it's saying hello to them in the morning, giving them a smile, finding somebody who is had a tough day and just needs to be cheered up. Sometimes that's more valuable than anything else you can do. Sometimes it's somebody actually needs a little bit of tzedakah, or they need to help finding a job or a shidduch or whatever it might be. These are all things that happen in this world that we can try to be involved in. We can try to be participants in, instead of sitting back and saying, okay, I'm really beyond, I've been there, I've done that. Every day that we are alive, that we are blessed with our health, with our functionality, is a day that we can try to accomplish something. So that's, as we go to Rosh Hashana and we think about this parsha, that's what we should be thinking about. We should be thanking Hashem that we are participating in the great return to Eretz Yisrael. That we have been blessed to be part of those that have returned. And we, at the same point, we should be thinking about those who we interact with who have not yet returned, and how, if it's possible, can they be reached? Is there a way we can influence them? Certainly, when we talk to them about what our experience is, it should be positive. It shouldn't be, oh, well, there's this problem and there's that problem and there's the bureaucracy. Because you know what? Everywhere has its bureaucracy. We should be focusing, whenever we're talking with people, especially people from Chutz La'aretz who we know, who we have relationships with, we should be focusing primarily on all of the benefits, all of the positive things that we have got in living in Eretz Yisrael. So those are just some of the things that I think we can begin to do to try to help along this process that the Moshe Rabbeinu has described of all of Am Yisrael returning to Eretz Yisrael. And we hope and pray that Hashem will hear our tefillot, will hear our tshuva, will continue this process, and will help us to bring this process to its final fruition with the coming of the Mashiach in Herav Yameinu. Thank you all. And I now open up for questions, comments, and feedback. Anybody? Okay. I wish you all a Shana Tova. Stop.